It's no secret that games on the NES tend to be really hard, and whenever I see a list of the most difficult games for Nintendo's 8-bit console, the first Castlevania from 1986 is most likely on it. But I don't know if that game actually deserves to be on such a list. Because I've never played the original Castlevania, and I often ask myself if it's a challenging adventure that is still enjoyable to play, or if it's a complete and utter nightmare that has a monster lurking inside the cartridge. Now, such an important question of course needs to be answered, so I sat down and played the original Castlevania from start to finish, and I meticulously counted each and every death along the way. That means that in the end I can make a fair and educated decision based on the amount of times I got my ass handed to me, but I will also show you the highlights of my suffering as I go through each level individually, and I will put a small death counter here so you can easily keep track and make fun of me in the meantime. Because watching someone getting slapped to oblivion makes for good content on YouTube. Full disclosure, I played this game on the Nintendo Switch through the Castlevania Anniversary Edition, which has the option to make save points. But to get the most authentic experience possible, I only used this feature to save my game between sessions. And yes, I'm aware that the first Castlevania had no passwords or save files, so you originally had to finish this game in one session. But to be honest, that's not gonna happen for me. And with that said, hey everyone, it's Toby, and today we'll find out how hard the original Castlevania actually is, and how many times I got my ass clapped while playing this game. So let's get this shit going, and I'm not an expert, but I guess our buddy Simon here is on his way to defeat Count Dracula. Although from what I've heard about this game, he may as well be on his way to get decked for hours on end. But before we can have a standoff with a master bloodsucker himself, we first have to break into his castle and make a complete sightseeing tour through the entirety of his real estate, which encompasses 6 whole levels, whereas each level splits into 3 stages and of course ends in a boss fight. So I first had to go through level 1, the main hallway, and thankfully the game doesn't kick you in the balls right away. I immediately found some power-ups for my mighty whip, and then I started whipping some enemies, which for now are the basic ghouls, dogs and bats, so kind of what you would expect at this point and not really much of a challenge. But the most frequent thing you have to whip in this game are candles. Because that's where Dracula keeps all his money, and that's also how you get most of your power-ups and your secondary weapons, like this holy water here. But the best thing you get in level 1 is a taste of this game's awesome soundtrack. Now the bad news is that the music quickly distracts you from what's going on the screen, so I took a little bit of damage from these dogs, but on the next screen I fortunately found one of the famous chicken in the walls. That is just what I need right now to restore my hit. Aw, come on man, I know that chicken expires quickly, but 3 seconds? That's stupid. Well, I guess I'm not a winner and therefore don't deserve a chicken dinner. And yeah, items in this game despawn after like 3 seconds, so you better be quick if you want to pick something up. However, my lack of chicken didn't stop me from flawlessly jumping these 2 pits in the following small basement section, so I was soon whipping more ghouls in the main hallway again, and on my way to beat the first level and potentially this whole game with 0 deaths. I mean, there's nothing that can stop me right now, and especially not that cute little flittermouse up there. Nope, that's the first boss guarding the end of the hallway, the Phantom Bat. But the fight against this leather flapper is pretty simple. The bat swoops down on you and occasionally shoots fireballs, and you try to whip it. But hitting the flying Phantom Bat with your mighty whip can be difficult, and using the axe works much better. But for inexplicable reasons, the fight got somehow pretty tense, and my controller malfunctioned at the worst possible moment. So there goes my perfect score. But you know what they say, right? Twice the charm, so I defeated the Phantom Bat on my second attempt and finished level 1 with only 1 death in total. So overall, that wasn't too hard, and we all know it would have been 0 deaths if it wasn't for that stupid chicken that lasted as long as I last during. Anyway, I think I'm performing pretty well, so I went right into level 2, where you have to climb your way up into the castle's chapel, and I also found a brand new weapon in here. The cross, which behaves more like a boomerang if you ask me, and which is really useful to dispatch these spear knights from a safe distance. But after some easy platforming, I met one of the game's most iconic enemies. The flying Medusa heads. Now the thing about these ladies is that they wobble around like they had far too many drinks on yesterday's girls' night. So it's actually not that easy to hit them with your delayed whip attack. But to be honest, it's also not really that bad, so I initially wondered why so many people are freaking out about them. Well, what can I say? I instantly found out why on the next screen, where you have to do some platforming while the Medusas stumble towards you left and right, which didn't end well for me. Yeah, getting knocked back or falling into pits is the easiest way to die in this game. And this little incident also resulted in my first game over, which put me straight back to the beginning of level 2. Thankfully, there are no limits on the amount of continues you have, so there's always the option for your game to be continued. Get it? So I eventually made it past the drunken Medusas, and after another round of spear knights, I found my next juicy wall chicken, which I quickly ate this time. Then I got to these spiky platforms, and I didn't want to find out if they instantly kill me or if they just take a good chunk of my life. So I made a big brain move and used the stopwatch that I found earlier to freeze the platforms. I mean, who would fall for this bullshit anyway? Yep, definitely editing that out. So I'm a genius and flawlessly dispatched these ghosts and fire-shooting bone pillars before I made it up into the castle's chapel, where I faced this game's second boss, Big Mommy Medusa. But she looks more terrifying than she actually is, and I defeated her first try by slapping her real good with my long and mighty whip. And please don't clip that sentence. Seriously, the whole fight consisted of me hitting her for like 10 seconds before it was over. But although Mommy Medusa got a nice spanking, I still died 6 times in level 2, which brings the overall death counter up to 7. That's quite the increase compared to level 1, but it was mainly because of the drunken Medusas not respecting the castle's traffic regulation. Anyway, I still think I'm performing pretty well, and went right into level 3, where you have to go over a totally intact bridge to get into this tower. So the game now brought me into a more open area, where I was immediately introduced to some new friends. The bouncy flea man and the jumpy and bone-throwing skeletons. These are definitely harder to deal with than the basic ghouls or spear knights, and I also noticed that enemies from now on deal 3 points of damage instead of 2. Quick nerd fact. The damage you receive in this game increases as you go through the levels. In level 1 and 2 you always receive 2 points of damage, in level 3 and 4 it goes up to 3, and in level 5 and 6 it maxes out at 4 points of damage. But that shouldn't be a problem because I found a quick and easy way to replenish my hit points. Yep, and would you look at how skillfully I dispatched these ravens with one powerful double kill. Yeah, that's how I do it. This level emphasizes a lot on deadly platforming, so there are cracks and holes everywhere for the inattentive adventurer, which is certainly not me. Okay, but you know what would be really embarrassing? Falling into the same hole twice. Well, I think it's better if I move to the last part of level 3, where you finally have to go over the bridge, and this is where the fun begins, because these ravens are actually skilled Counter-Strike players, so just when you thought you dodged them, they pull a quick 180 no-scope and snipe you in the back. Yeah, crossing the bridge was definitely not so easy, as it was guarded by a couple of fire-shooting bone pillars, which were accompanied by either some quickscope ravens or a horde of drunken Medusas, and dealing with all of this shit at the same time is quite the pain in the ass. This is partly because of the deliberate controls in this game, where your actions are always a commitment. Your whip attack, for example, has this small wind-up animation before the attack goes off, so you really have to precisely time your attacks. And the developers designed the enemies with that in mind. So the bone pillars on the bridge, for example, shoot 3 fireballs in your direction, which you can all whip away to avoid taking damage. But if your timing is wrong and you whip too early, you don't have enough time to get another whip out and will certainly get hit. Getting hit then has this huge knockback, and with all the house and platforming in this level, well, you get the idea, right? Same goes for jumping, because you cannot change your trajectory in mid-air like you can for example in the Mario games, so you better be sure that there is something you can land on, otherwise... But after like 10 attempts, I made it over the bridge and straight to the next boss fight against two mummy men, not to be confused with Big Mommy Medusa. So fighting two bosses at the same time might be scary, but there's also a juicy wall chicken right inside the boss tower where the fight takes place. So I had no problems defeating the two bandages, but I still died 13 times in level 3. Which more than doubles the death counter up to 20. Seems like the game is getting harder by the minute, which is a little concerning because I just made it halfway through the game. But the easy fight against the mummies also gave me a big confidence boost, so I was still feeling pretty good going into level 4. I mean, there's no way things are going down from here, right? Well, of course there's something like a sewer level in this game, my all-time favorite. Actually, this is not a sewer, but just a dark water cave, with lots of bats and fishmen coming at you left and right, while you have to make some timed jumps on moving platforms. And remember what I just said about jumping being a commitment, and you gotta be sure that there's something to land on. Yeah, I guess it's finally time to find out if Simon Belmont can actually swim. I'm not sure. Let's try again. I blinked there for a second, so I'll have to check again. Seems like he needs more practice, but what kept my spirit afloat was the fact that I was at the beginning of a new level, so a game over didn't put me back that much. The game, however, now also starts to use some questionable tactics, like this low cave ceiling that pushes you off the platform, or these flying fishmen, which somehow clip straight through the wall to eventually fall down on you. Anyway, I eventually made it out of the cave and again into an open area, where carrier birds are constantly shitting these bouncy fleamen all over the place. Now this may sound disgustingly dangerous, but it's really not that bad. You can simply whip the fleamen the moment they touch the ground, and I didn't even take damage the first time I went through this area. Now seriously, the only potential danger in my opinion is this bone dragon guarding the entrance to what I assume is the main castle. But I found a lucky invisibility potion, so I could simply walk straight through. And yes, it really is an invisibility potion, so no enemy can see you right now. But in the following small corridor, I had to fight and defeat these bone dragons, which can take a lot of hits from your mighty whip. Thankfully, I also found another juicy wall chicken, because it was boss time again, and I guess this is supposed to be Frankenstein's monster, accompanied by... a fleaman? I don't know. I later learned that this is supposed to be Igor, the hunchbacked laboratory assistant of Dr. Frankenstein. And it turns out that Igor is the most dangerous component of this fight. He frantically jumps around and shoots fireballs while you have to take out the monster. So it gets a little chaotic and I even game overed once in this fight, which meant I unfortunately had to go through the water cave again. So let's see if Simon Belmont finally learned to swim. Well, practice makes perfect, so the second time I reached the boss, I finally managed to defeat him, and that's level 4 done and dealt with after dying 17 times in here. Which brings the overall death counter up to 37 and me into level 5. And oh boy, level 5 is where the game really takes a dump on you, as you now have to fight your way through the main castle, and as I mentioned earlier, all enemies from now on deal 4 points of damage. So with your maximum hit points being 16, you can only take 4 hits in total. But I was initially putting on quite the performance and fought my way through what I assume is the castle's dungeon, where I dispatched immortal skeletons, bouncy fleamen and also the infamous Axe Knights. So my spirit was at an all-time high. But that quickly changed once I reached the staircase, because on the other side, the game metaphorically violated my ass in every possible way. Just for context, I only died once in level 5 so far, and I'm actually near the boss. Keep that in mind. So once I went up the stairs, I reached a long hallway with a lot of picture frames in the background, and I again had to fight one of these Axe Knights. But in addition, I was also constantly attacked by the drunken Medusas, and oh my god! This is a complete nightmare enemy combination. The knight keeps you at a distance, so you have to move forward to get into whipping range. And moving forward means you run straight into the curving piss path of the drunken Medusas. All while the knight throws his axe either straight into your face, or if you initially evade it, right into your ass. But if you still manage to defeat the knight, guess what? There is another one right afterwards, because one ass clapping seldom comes alone. Now let's assume you also get past the second knight, probably with little to no health left and after dying a couple of times. Guess what happens next? A third knight? Nope. The game crashes? Nah, that will happen later. Your balls explode? Well, in comparison, that wouldn't be too bad, because after defeating the two knights, you actually have to fight the Grim Reaper himself, and he is the hardest boss by a mile so far. In contrast to the previous bosses, which I could somehow defeat by mindlessly whipping them left and right, this guy is not only hard to hit, he also summons a stupid amount of scythes that attack from every possible direction. Yeah, this is complete and utter overkill, because you will likely reach this boss with only half your hit points, so you can only take 2 more hits before you hear a familiar sound again. Seriously, I don't know who designed this dumpster fire, but man, that person is a sadistic genius and deserves to rot in hell. So needless to say, I died a lot in this hallway, either to the two knights or to the boss fight afterwards. And every game over meant I had to go through the whole level again just to get my ass handed to me at the end. This was honestly the first solid wall that I hit, and for quite some time it didn't seem like I was making any progress. Well, I don't know how, but after countless attempts, I somehow learned to deal with the two knights and was getting solid shots at the boss himself, and really managed to defeat the Reaper, which certainly qualifies me as one of the greatest gamers in history. But before I went on, I first had to apply some cooling cream because I got my ass clapped 35 times in level 5, which kind of doubled the death counter up to 72, and I spent over 1.5 hours in this nightmare level. In comparison, it just took me a little over 1 hour to complete level 1, 2, 3 and 4 combined, and I asked myself if it can possibly get any worse from here. Well, I won't spoil it, so you now have to watch me going into the final level 6, where you have to fight your way through the big clock tower of this castle to reach Dracula's chamber. But first I had to cross another totally intact bridge, and this time it was not guarded by some fire-shooting bone pillars and instead by a couple of phantom bats, the boss from the first level. Now fighting off several of these guys fair and square is pretty tough, and I quickly realized that a much better approach is to handle them the same way I handle all of my problems. I simply ignore them. Yep, if your timing is right, you can swiftly sneak underneath the bats. I then found myself inside the clock tower and first had to dispatch some awkwardly placed skeletons, making my deserved ascension more challenging than it needed to be. And no, it wasn't simply a skill issue. Once I reached the other side, those pesky carrier birds from level 4 again started to dump fleamen all over the place. Inside the tower, mind you. Now, avoiding all this stuff that is going on here while doing some platforming is annoying as hell, so the best way for me to get through this part was similar to my approach on the bridge outside. I just made a run for it and tried to get to the end as quickly as I can, which brought me straight to the entrance of Dracula's chamber. So I guess that's it. The final boss, Count Dracula himself. But although he may be the hardest boss of the game, the developers were incredibly generous this time, because when you game over during this fight, you do not start at the beginning of level 6 again and instead right next to his chamber. That is freaking gold and makes the final battle so much more manageable. Maybe this was an attempt to make up for the disaster in level 5. But this doesn't mean the fight is going to be easy, as Dracula randomly teleports to different locations, which often tends to be right inside your character sprite. And he then shoots a barrage of fireballs, which are not that easy to dodge. After some time, I figured that the best way to defeat him is to make a timed jump over the fireballs and whip him straight in the head. But the timings are really tight, and it took me quite a while to slowly wear him down. And if you ask yourself why I'm not using any of the sub-weapons that you can find in his chamber, well, I used them once, and then this happened. Yep, my game completely froze. Now, the game freezing is a common glitch that occurs in some early versions of Castlevania when there are too many sprites on the screen, which tends to happen if you use, for example, the cross during the fight against Dracula. And Konami, of course, used the early version of the game for their Anniversary Edition. So, thanks Konami. Thankfully, I had my game saved at the beginning of level 6 and I don't want to know how many mental breakdowns were caused back in the day when this happened to some kid playing the game on the NES. No! So I quickly made it back to Dracula's chamber and whipped his stupid head right off the screen. So the game is finally over. Nope. Second phase, baby, because why not? Now, the fight against the giant monster Dracula was another reason why I didn't want to use any of my sub-weapons in Phase 1, because I definitely needed them here in Phase 2. The boss now jumps around and occasionally shoots fireballs, which are even harder to dodge this time. But at some point I realized that using the holy water, which you can fortunately find inside his chamber, kind of stuns him in place, so I abused the holy shit out of this and could finally defeat Daddy Vampire, which even got me an extra life. And that concludes the final level 6, where I died an additional and impressive 50 times. Bringing the overall death counter up to 122 after 3 hours and 42 minutes of playtime. Yep, that means on average, I suffered around half a death per minute. And I think I earned a like and subscribe at this point. Now, to summarize my experience, I think 122 deaths speak for themselves, and the original Castlevania is definitely a tough challenge, but it is also totally fun to play. Now seriously, I was surprised how well the game increases the difficulty over the course of the levels without feeling cheap or overwhelmingly out of control. Maybe with that one little exception at the end of level 5. Although I died the most in level 6 because of the tough boss fight against Dracula, the generous respawn point goes a long way to not make you wanna quit. So level 5 is in my opinion the hardest part of the game. And it's not that the knights or medusas are hard to defeat on their own, it's just that the combination of them is a complete and utter nightmare. And this is what the game exceptionally pulls off. It introduces enemies and lets you learn their patterns, and then it combines them just the right way to make your day miserable. Another example would be the bone pillars on the bridge in level 3, which are easily dealt with on their own, but when you throw some quickscope ravens or drunken medusas into the mix, it quickly gets out of hand. So I definitely think that the original Castlevania is a worthy adventure and totally playable to this day. Don't get me wrong though, you will still get mad and swear a whole damn lot, but in a good way that motivates you to finally beat this piece of shit. And if you want to motivate me, you can always become a member of my channel and get some nice custom emojis and my eternal gratitude as reward. But you can of course also watch this video next, where I show you how to defeat the hardest boss in Xenogears. Or you can watch whatever video YouTube recommends for you right there, because this is to be continued. Thanks for watching.